Hi everyone, today we are talking about the feminist case for marriage, the liberalization of divorce. Louise Perry says that the legalization of divorce is nothing to celebrate. She notes that on April 6, 2022, no-fault divorce was finally legalized in the United Kingdom, and heterosexual marriage rates are at their lowest point on record, down from 400,000 in the early 1970s to 200,000 in 2020. I can't believe the UK waited 40 to 50 years after the rest of the Western world to establish this practice. So I suppose there will likely be a rise now that you may get divorced without a valid reason. The following is a portion of what Louise says in her article, and I've chosen to quote her. The sexual revolutionaries are right to point out the many shortcomings of the monogamous marriage paradigm, but it also offers the best approach to the issues raised by the asymmetrical investments that men and women make in the process of reproduction. With all of its trade-offs, the traditional model had some merit. The father was primarily responsible for earning money, and the mother was responsible for raising the children at home. This model allows mothers and children to be physically together while also financially supporting it. In an era of labor-saving technologies like gas boilers and washing machines, it is now easier for mothers of young children to work outside the home. She's finally realized that a single divorced mother can't take care of a successful family all by herself, especially on low wages. So what does she want to do to get the men back to the table? As single mothers are forced to, raising a successful family on her own is nearly impossible, especially on low wages. She argues that feminists are both correct and incorrect about marriage before complaining that modern weddings are too expensive and that couples can't get married until they have saved enough money for a lavish celebration. She also blames men by saying that all we care about is short-termism and our sexual behavior in partners. They were afraid of commitment when it comes to marriage. This woman is not begging for additional marriage to come back. In fact, it sounds like she's blaming me, the top 5 to 10% of men, mind you, that aren't having much of the sex. How about if she blamed the women those men are sleeping with for giving sex away too easily? But she doesn't do that. She also has an answer, and here it is, and I quote, "In order to change the incentive structure, we would need a technology that discourages short-termism in male sexual behavior, protects the economic interests of the mother, and creates a stable environment for the raising of children. And we already have such a technology, even if it's old, clunky, and prone to periodic failure. It's called monogamous marriage," unquote. But when I hear that, all I hear is that women get their economic needs met through marriage and children get a good environment. But the giga-chads lose out on the sexual variety factor. Going back to traditional marriage is a step down for such men. Besides, you can't force them to get married anyways. You also can't force them to not go around and sleep with married women and wreck their relationships that way either. I'll discuss more the wedding chapel clown world show. Lewis spends most of the article placating to feminists and kissing their oversized heinies by telling them how many valid points they've made. She also discusses how in the United States there's a sexual counter-revolution starting with Generation Z. Yeah, I don't think so. You're not going to persuade the carousel riders with cooches to stop riding, and you're not going to stop Chad's constant harping on about how men are inferior by saying, to paraphrase Chad, half of the population are far more physically imposing, are much more interested in pursuing casual sex, and will never be able to get pregnant, while the other half of the population bear the literal consequences of sexual activities. It will always be the mother cradling the infant who is left. In order to entice us back to the altar, it looks like she's attempting to convey that women will be left holding the bag. However, women can always undergo an abortion to get rid of that sack of cells. She also bemoans the fact that the future looks bright for children whose parents were never wed in the first place. Unmarried parents are about twice as likely to divorce than married parents, and as a result, children are either raised by a single parent or live with step-parents, who are typically the stepfather. She wants such men to get married for the benefit of the rugrats and the well-being of the women. But what about the man leaving himself open to divorce, rape, and having his life destroyed as a result? When I hear that, all I can think is, will someone please think of the children? Doesn't anyone else hear that? It sounds like shaming language targeting men who are living in common law relationships with kids who are not married. Louise wraps up the piece by examining a different Vice magazine article about radical monogamy, which is merely another rebranding of marriage and monogamy that the feminists shattered. And then all of a sudden, they've found it again and relabeled it as if it were their own invention. Women's liberation in the 1960s and 1970s was all about releasing women from traditional marriage shackles, but now they appear to want it back under a different name to avoid looking foolish for having abandoned it in the first place. There has been a tiny drop in divorce rates, according to Louise, but this isn't due to a genuine increase in marital duration. Rather, it's because marriage rates have continued to plummet since 1968, and you can't be divorced if you don't get married in the first place. In 2019, 8% of children were born to unmarried parents. It appears that now Louise and many other women have discovered the scourge of the single mother household. Here's what she says, and I quote, "Despite the frequently valiant efforts of the single mother household is still a problem." It sounds like many women have realized that their adult children are an embarrassment and won't be useful idiots and utilities to them in the future. This leads to higher rates of teen pregnancy for boys, higher rates of emotional and behavioral problems for both sexes, and this is because single mothers are forced to take on the nearly impossible task of doing everything themselves, including all of the earning plus all of the caring, socializing, and disciplining of their children. Why is the lamestream media suddenly concerned about birth rates? Is it because women are suffering as single mothers? Is it because the fertility rates are so low that they actually want heritage Britons to have more children? I believe it is essentially just a desire to enslave men so that the state doesn't have to spend money on them. When you can just have a relationship if that's what you actually want to do, women don't want to take accountability. It's all feminist fault, and non-men that refuse to come in and get married, they blame deadbeat dads even when they're non-residents not paying child support in full. Apart where Louise mentions that there's wisdom in the traditional model, of course, that's the foundation of civilization. But do you really think that most women agree to only being able to sleep with one man for life, or the Chads agreed to the benefit of harnessing the beta male providers was too great to pass up for the sake of having a stable society? You can't take away the incentives and expect men to still believe marriage is worthwhile if they were once rewarded with it and given both the benefits and the responsibilities. Now they were cursing men with marriage instead of rewarding them with it and giving them both the benefits and the responsibilities. This article doesn't portray women pleading with men to be married. Instead, they only won the benefits they lost. Nonetheless, there is no mention of abolishing family courts or awarding parental responsibility to the father in the event that a mother violates her nuptial vows. She was the one who lost everything because there were consequences for her terrible behavior, as was customary in the past, but on our side, he doesn't hold women accountable for their own deeds. Returning accountability to women would actually be the way to go, rather than men avoiding responsibility, because women tend to blame everyone when things go wrong, and they're generally allergic to taking the blame. If we have any hopes of returning to a somewhat normal society, then this is actually the way to go. Because a male is blamed when anything goes wrong, and a woman is given credit when something goes right. Because of our culture, guys will only play rigged games for so long before we give up and go our separate ways. The cooches out there are unaware that men's sexual desire has boundaries. The average beta is content to be with the same woman his entire life, so even Louise the Trap thought writer from the UK thinks that what men want is sexual variety. However, it's possible that only the men she actually wants to get together with share this opinion. The average beta is content to be with the same woman his entire life. But simply as human beings that are only values as utilities for women and children, that's what women are pleading for men to return to being. And she's trying to con us into doing that by invoking guilt to get us to marry if we're already in common law relationships, or to make us feel bad like those poor men on the Titanic who gave their lives, both seats and lives, to the women and children, to the feminists out there. All I have to say is come back to men. I hope the government goes bankrupt bringing in unproductive migrants to Britain, because at this point it's probably the only thing that'll actually get you women back to the negotiating table anyway. That's it for today, and the topic. Don't forget to smash the like button, similar to how feminists just want to go back to the 1980s and 1990s when men hadn't yet realized that the game was rigged and that we would smash our hopes and dreams by marrying then bang the bell.